Is a modern arsenal compatible with a global supply chain? Welcome to the call. I'm Jay Sapsford. The war in Ukraine has brought about a massive change in modern warfare. Drones and data are now every bit as important as missiles and manpower. Defense spending is surging, putting pressure on the arms industry. Pressure to secure supply chains, to produce at speed and at scale, and to deliver across shifting alliances. So, our frame for today: can the defense industry meet the moment? Joining us now is Mark Esper, former U.S. Secretary of Defense and now a managing partner at Red Cell Partners, working at the intersection of national security and innovation. Secretary Esper, welcome to the call.
Thanks, Jay. Great to be here with you and your audience.
Now, listening to the speeches at the Munich Security Conference, it seems cyber and tech are now as badly needed as jets, ships, and troops. I wonder if you could speak to the challenge of keeping up with technological change and the role of the venture capital industry in that challenge, given your years of experience.
Yeah, certainly. Look, if you go back all the way to World War II, there have been some hallmarks of American warfighting, and part of it's been maneuver warfare, for example, when it comes to doctrine. But it also has to do about the capabilities and innovation of our soldiers, and then thirdly, what we're going to talk about today is technology. America has always been a leader in technology, and that has given us distinct advantages on the battlefield. For me, of course, I was part of Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. That was the era of when we introduced information warfare and the use of satellite guided technologies and a broad range of advanced technologies that really shook the world and our competitors. So it absolutely is a critical part of technology. It's something we have to exceed and lead in. And I believe we still are leading in many of those areas, but obviously more needs to be done.
As you look at artificial intelligence, that's clearly going to be a key to being successful on the battlefield. What's the optimal way of rolling that, and how do you differentiate between what really moves the battlefield forward and those things that are really kind of a distraction?
Yeah, great question. I smile a little bit because when I was Secretary of the Army, I was asked what my top priority was, and it was AI then. And as I became Secretary of Defense, my top priority was AI, AI, and AI, because we knew the power of it. And a lot of people think about it's AI on the tactical edge of the battlefield, and it is that, but it's also all the way back into the back office, right? In terms of predictive maintenance, in terms of managing your personnel, sifting through data. So I think the challenge is for the military, and in this regard, it reaches out to Silicon Valley, and I'll use Silicon Valley throughout our talk
Mm.
to reference other hubs, whether it's Austin or Boston or New York or Pittsburgh, you name it. It's going to be these innovation hubs, and innovators are going to have to think across the battlefield, much like my young firm, Red Cell Partners, is doing when it comes to Air Force mobility and trying to figure out supply chain logistics. Is how do we advance the military's capabilities across all domains in all factors of its work and all experiences that it will undergo in modern combat. And so that's where I see the tech community moving out today, and that's absolutely necessary because, of course, our greatest competitor, China, is certainly doing this, and they are keeping pace with us.
Now, Mr. Secretary, we're putting up a chart of the price of something called ammonium paratungstate, or APT. Now, APT has a wide variety of uses, but it is a critical input for making machine tools. And machine tools, of course, are crucial to all manufacturers, including the defense industrial base. Now, this shows the price of APT rose a whopping 200% in 2025. Now, part of that is just a surge in demand, but perhaps the biggest reason is China dominates APT processing and threatens to restrict supply through export controls. We've seen China do this with a slew of materials, all of them critical to our defense: gallium, antimony, graphite, lithium. How did we get into this situation, and how can we get out of it?
Well, we took our eye off the ball at the end of the Cold War in 1991, right? We thought about the end of history being upon us, and that would be a new era where democracy would flourish. The Chinese obviously were not and still are not a democracy, but we believed that economic freedom would pull them along in that direction. And in 2001, we invited them to join the World Trade Organization, believing again that capitalism, the world markets would inject political change. It never happened. Rather, the Chinese had a strategic plan, and that was to build their military up, to challenge us on the world stage, to build up their economy, and to dominate certain key sectors. I mean, they knew going back to the 1990s that they wanted to dominate in the rare earths, and they went about doing it. And so now we know that they mine 60% of the rare earths and process 90% of them. And rare earths are critical not just for the American military, when it's critical in everything from attack submarines and F-35s to munitions. But as we know today, in commercial goods, whether it's automobiles and washing machines and machine tools, so China has done this not just in that space, but in all the others you mentioned, whether it's APT, other chemicals, other strategic minerals. Gallium is a new one. Gallium was critical when during my time at Raytheon, we used them in the Patriot air defense system. So they are dominating in these spaces, and now there's been this awakening the last few years, and I see the United States, both at a governmental level and at a commercial level, making these investments into these areas to try and gain some reliability and independence from the Chinese supply chains.
Now, you mentioned the Patriot air defense system. Are there other weapon systems in our supply chains that are far too reliant on foreign sources?
Oh, absolutely. Look, we learned this during the COVID crisis when
Mm.
I was running the Pentagon. When it hit full bore in March and April of 2020, that's when we started seeing problems when it came to healthcare and supplies and you know PPI, personal protective gear. And what we found is many of those supply chains and active ingredients in pharmaceuticals found their way all the way back to China. They also found their way to back to other friendly countries, but friendly countries that weren't reliable in times of crisis. And so I think it was a big aha moment for many of us to see that happen. And of course, again, it extends to other sectors, other parts of the defense sector, but also the commercial sector as well. And I think it's incumbent upon everybody to take a hard look at where can we reach in, gain some market share, and grow that market out to make sure that in the future, because this competition with China is not going to end anytime soon, we need to be prepared.
After during the 90s, we had a peace dividend after the fall of the Soviet Union, and a lot of the primary contractors in the defense industrial base consolidated at the behest of the government with the blessing of the government. One of our members is asking, given the growing needs, has there been too much consolidation among defense contractors?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, look, we did take the peace dividend, but the Chinese didn't take the dividend,
Hmm.
and the Russians couldn't afford to take it. And so again, we relaxed. And then, of course, for obvious reasons, for the right reasons in many ways, we had to fight the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that further kind of took our attention off the ball when it came to the strategic adversaries such as China and Russia to a lesser degree. So yes, I think there was too much consolidation. You see today in the defense industry, you have one or two jet manufacturers, right? Lockheed and Boeing. You have you have one manufacturer currently of a strategic bomber, Northrop. And so if you go down all these various types of weapon systems, look at naval warfare, right? You only have two or maybe three competitors. I like to see a market where we have more, and clearly these days where we see a lot more of the innovative economy. I'll call that again the startups, the entrepreneurs, the Silicon Valley types entering. They can add a lot of energy, a lot of innovation, a lot of great ideas into this into our traditional defense industrial base that is much needed.
Now, those new startups and the smaller companies have to work alongside the primary contractors, I would think. I'm wondering about the stockpiles of traditional munitions. Do we have enough right now after all
No,
the support we've given to Ukraine?
no, not at all. We don't have enough, and that became apparent when we tried to supply Ukraine
Mm.
over the last 4 years, and that came at a time we were also supplying, if you recall, Israel with weapons, and we quickly found out that we were running short in many stockpiles. Look, and I remember my days from being at Raytheon. I remember my days on Capitol Hill when I would see the requests come in for missiles such as AMRAAMs or SM-3s, air defense missiles. You'd see low numbers being purchased, just enough to kind of sustain what we thought was a minimal stockpile.
Mm.
And we didn't necessarily factor in the needs of allies or factor in the needs of a multi-front war. And so I think the lesson is, whereas munitions was this unsexy line item defense budget that was often poached to pay for other things, that now it's a really critical thing. I mean, we've seen publicly run war games where a standoff with China in the Taiwan Strait we would exhaust our stockpiles of key munitions in a matter of days,
Mm.
days. And so that would leave us really in a dangerous situation. So I think we're at the point now where we need to not only stockpile weapons, but have the manufacturing capacity to surge quickly. And if that means that we have to build factories and fabrication facilities and whatnot and put them in some type of warm, if not cool status, then I think we need to be prepared to do that.
Okay, so we also have the world's preeminent blue water navy. We have the ability to project power all over the globe.
Mhm.
But my understanding is that there's a bit of a backlog for ships right now in order to maintain that force. I wonder what your assessment is of that backlog and how we might address it.
Yeah, it really is a problem. I mean, the best example is I think the most important naval vessel we should be building is the nuclear attack submarine, the Virginia class submarines.
Hmm.
We're supposed to be building at least two a year. We're building 1.2 a year, and so there is a significant backlog right there. We know that the aircraft carriers, the Ford, who is now deployed, she was years behind schedule and years over budget, and her successor is also behind schedule and over budget. So look, I think shipbuilding is one particular area of focus we need to take on. I did as Secretary of Defense, worked with the Navy and other players inside and outside the department, where we looked at a future naval force. Because right now we're at about 290 ships. Many of those are not able to go to sea due to maintenance backlogs, which is also related to shipbuilding. So we need to get up to that 350, 360, 370 ship Navy of manned ships. And then, of course, what we proposed in my plan was an unmanned force of somewhere between 100 and 150 unmanned ships, because look, the Chinese Navy continues to build and deploy. They have 230 sometimes the shipbuilding capacity that we have in the United States. So, look, I'm leading a new commission that's going to come out soon with the Atlantic Council. We're going to take on shipbuilding, working with all the key players and stakeholders. I'm excited about it, and hopefully we can offer some good recommendations to both the Congress and the Defense Department and the White House about some ideas to really accelerate naval shipbuilding and commercial shipbuilding to some degree as well.
One of the most fascinating aspects of shipbuilding is the need for icebreakers. There's been a lot of jostling over Greenland lately, but I'm just wondering, when you were running the Pentagon, was the Arctic something that was coming across your desk a lot, and the need to improve our posture in that
Sure.
region?
Absolutely. Of course, we have Army, Navy, and Air Force up there. I would visit the Army sites, Army bases as Secretary of the Army. But as we do now, we had then, of course, Russian bomber intrusions of our air defense identification zones that have been ongoing and quite alarming as they've paired up at times with the Chinese. And then, of course, as you said, there is the maritime traffic up there, which continues to open up as we see, the waters warm and the ice break up. So I think that's going to become a new area. Russia has contested it for many years.
Mm.
China amusingly declares itself a near Arctic country despite being 700 plus miles away from the Arctic. But they clearly see strategic advantage and commercial advantage if they can exploit those routes. So I think clearly we need to put more emphasis in the Arctic, not just outside Alaska, north of Alaska, but of course on the Atlantic side in places like Greenland, Iceland, and Norway, those areas that are really heavily trafficked by the Russians.
So, along that line of the threat coming from the north, I have a couple of member questions. We used to dominate hypersonics. Are we going to see more investments in that area?
Uh, we should. Hypersonics are an incredible tool. We need to make sure we can build and continue to dominate and deploy. But they aren't the be all end all. They are another type of arrow in what should be a very large quiver of munitions that we can pull out of our stockpile and use as appropriate. And so I do think that's something we need to continue to develop. During my tenure, we tried to build jointly compatible Air Force, Navy, and Army systems. At least I think the Army and the Air Force are still cooperating on that. But those are clearly very important weapons that'll be useful when you're thinking about penetrating at long range Chinese air defenses.
Right. Our rivals are filling out their quivers,
Hmm.
obviously, with all different kinds of ballistic and other cruise missiles and so forth.
Yeah, certainly the Chinese.
Another one of our members is asking, missile defense systems have focused on defending troops deployed overseas, but some argue our homeland defenses are not quite where they need to be. Does Secretary Esper believe we need Golden Dome?
I think we need a homeland defense system that is reliable, effective, and affordable.
Hmm.
And that means right now we can defend against limited numbers of ballistic missiles. We certainly can't defend the United States against a full Russian onslaught. That would be impossible for us to defend against. But there are other new technologies that we need to be prepared for that I think we are less prepared for, such as fractional orbital launches, cruise missile launches, things like that can poke holes in our current defenses. And so I think that's certainly something that we need to look at. And look, the notion of of Golden Dome needs to be developed, fleshed out, and explained so we can all take a look at it. I've seen some of those discussions. I do consulting for corporations that are involved in that for full transparency, and I think all are asking the same questions: what does it look like? What's the timeline? What are the various components? What are we trying exactly to defend against? How long will it take? How much will it cost? I mean, there have been estimates up there that would take decades and trillions of dollars, depending on what that concept looks like. But I think it's something we need to explore and make sure we can do. We again build something reliable, credible, effective, and affordable here in the near term to at least plug the gaps.
So that sort of a defense system would be hugely reliant on satellite capabilities. Are you worried that we're a little bit too dependent on a small number of companies that are able to take us out into the atmosphere?
There are a small number of companies, but American companies are leading in this space, right? You have
Right.
obviously SpaceX has done incredible things, but Blue Origin is right there as well. We have a number of other launchers, so I think we do the best out there when it comes to access to space. We have a widely deployed commercial and government satellite system, so I think we can handle that. I do think we need to continue to recognize that space has become a warfighting domain, so we need to have the capabilities not only to defend, but to conduct offensive operations in space because look, the loss of our space assets would be terrible for our military, but tragic for our economy as well. So much of everything we do depends on space, whether it's GPS from here to there or ATM machines that rely on signals from space. You name it. So much of our culture and way of life is built around commercial space. So it's critical that we continue to dominate in that high ground.
So another member is asking us, if you're a non-defense company, where do you see adjacent opportunity in energy, metals, logistics, cyber, space, or advanced manufacturing?
Yeah, they just cited many of them because those are all areas where I think there's going to be increasingly an important partnership between the defense side of the industrial base and the non-defense side. I mean, we saw this in World War II. We became the arsenal of democracy because we saw great American companies transition from a commercial space to defense space. And then after the war, they kind of maintained a relationship between the both. And so I think we need to maintain that as well. But look, there is a slow decoupling happening between the Chinese and the United States. And they want to do it. We recognize the need to do it. It won't be in everything, but it will be in a lot of things. And I think we should recognize that now. And it's everything from rare earths to specialty metals to strategic minerals to um, it could be machine tools. It could be, as you said, uh, energy systems. We're making great advancements when it comes to nuclear energy, but so many things are happening out there where I think if you look at where the Chinese dominate, I think that's where the space will open up because we can't afford to allow them to dominate our market or frankly the international market. So there are a lot of areas where they've achieved that, unfortunately.
So there's been a lot of work in trying to speed up our procurement process. Are we there yet, or do we need to have more work to do?
I don't think we're there yet, and we have a lot more work to do. I think it's great what the administration's trying to do in that regard, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to measure outcome and performance. I've been hopeful because I've seen Congress do something they've been reluctant to do in the past, and that is they've given in the past year or so DoD multi-year procurement authority to purchase a range of munitions that are needed in a war fight against China. So we have that. We have multi-year authority. Now it's going to require investment by both the government and the private sector, right? The Raytheons, the Lockheeds, the Northrops, to build out the factory, the plant, to buy the long lead items, to train the people necessary to be able to put more production online. And then again, we have to think through how do we keep that production online once we get through if there's ultimately an end to the conflict in Ukraine, does that take the heat off or do we continue to recognize as we should that we need to be prepared for a potential fight against China? So we're going to have to answer those tough questions about do we put factories and plants in some type of cold status, warm status, you name it, but we need to have that surge capacity.
All right, as our final question, Mr. Secretary, even as the battlefield changes through all of these technological changes, one of the constants is the need for patriotic men and women to serve. Yet some branches have struggled in recent years to meet their recruiting targets. Is our tradition of the all-volunteer force at risk? And if so, what can we do to shore it up?
Yeah, I do think it's at risk. I mean, if you go back to when we made the transition to the all volunteer force in 1973, you had a different cohort of Americans, many of whom were inspired to serve by their uncles or dads or granddads, you name it. And these days now, what is it, 50, 60 years later, we have less of a relationship between those who want to serve and their predecessors and the military writ large. So now you have what I call the greatest 1%, the top tier 1% are these young Americans today that want to serve. But yet, what you find today is for a number of factors, and they've been growing over time, and we see the numbers getting worse. We now know that 78% of America's youth are unqualified to serve in our military because of health issues, mental health issues, criminal records, drug use, you name it. And then when you whittle down that number from the remaining, what is it, 22% or so,
Hmm.
And those who are interested in serving, you get to a single digits, 9%. So the pool of people able to serve and willing to serve increasingly decreases. Now, that doesn't mean at times we'll have surges in people interested in deploying in serving. It happens when you have economic downturns, and we've seen an uptick recently, a lot attributable to what the services have done to help bring young potential recruits along. But I'm concerned that longitudinally, over the long term, we'll continue to see few and few Americans both qualified to serve and interested in serving. And by the way, the being able to serve is not just a concern for the America's military. It should be a concern for employers. And when I speak to people across the country, you find them. A lot of people say, "Look, I just can't find the workers who can show up on time, who can pass a drug test, who can work in my factory, who can work in my shop, who can work in my facility." And so I think it's a bigger problem out there that we need to tackle. Unfortunately, it's not one that always kind of breaks the surface. It's slow moving and it's societal. So I think that's something we have to pay really close attention to.
Well, we deeply appreciate you joining us today and shedding light on this extremely important story. Mark Esper, former U.S. Defense Secretary, we thank you both for your service and for your time today.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you.
All right, our audience has had their shot of informational espresso and is ready to tackle the day. Next week, we mark the 4th anniversary of the war in Ukraine with former CIA analyst and senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security, Andrea Kendall Taylor. Missed a live episode? Catch the replay on our website, LinkedIn, or on YouTube. You can also listen to the call's podcast edition on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Thank you to you, our members, for joining us today. This has been The Call, brought to you by the Global Intelligence Desk, asking the right questions to navigate uncertain times.